There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean Breeze Books. Welcome back to my channel and my empty shelves. Just starting to get packed up for the big move in 10 days or so. And I'm going to film a book haul. So let's get started. Got a real mixed bag as per usual. Here is a Welsh Jewish novel. It's called Ash on a Young Man's Sleeve by Dannie Abse, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was first published in 1954. This Library of Wales edition, 2006. The reason I have this is because I purchased the audiobook on Spiracle and I decided to splurge and get all of the paper copies I could, so I could do an audio-text combo, and that's why I have this. This is an autobiographical novel set in the 1930s about a Jewish family in Wales. The author, Dannie Abse, born in Cardiff, 1923, wrote a bunch of books, died in 2014. The epigraph is from a T.S. Eliot poem I'm not familiar with, Little Gidding. Ash on an old man's sleeve is all the ash burnt roses leave. Dust in the air suspended marks the place where a story ended. Dust inbreathed was a house. Opening paragraph. June the 1st was our agreement, our day of peace. It came in that year with all sunshine and the windows open and the neighbor's radio. It was tennis players and the yellow seasick trams grinding down Cathedral Road. It was the end of a school day where we left our carved initials, hurt and momentous, in the wooden desk, and our schoolteacher, old Nobbleknees, rubbing off chalk from the blackboard like a nasty day from the calendar. "Mind how you cross the road," she said. "Please, Miss Morgan," asked Philip, "can I have my yo-yo back? I won't talk during lessons." Well, that's quite a charming opening. Next is another British novel from the same era called A Well Full of Leaves by Elizabeth Myers. I wanted to read it so bad that I was willing to purchase a less than aesthetically pleasing, like that title and author isn't even centered. Some Aspel classic, some stupid print-on-demand kind of thing. Originally published in 1943, opens with the childhood of the protagonist Laura in the north of England, and plot ensues. The author, Elizabeth Myers, she died in 1947, only aged 34. And this was her debut, published in 1943 during the war. There is one line from a Sir Thomas Brown poem, Urn Burial. It's not even a full line. Ready to be anything, in the ecstasy of being ever. I'll read the opening few paragraphs. They're all very short. From chapter 1. One afternoon, in the summer holidays of 1920, 4 children were standing in a northern park arguing. It was like this. Visits to the North Park were not easily come by, and we were trying to hit off a way of getting the most out of the precious afternoon. The park must have been a shabby little place. It had lost all its springtime freshness, and the grass and trees looked as though they had been steeped in lemonade. As for the flower beds, anxious not to seem bold, they had limited themselves to little events of sparse antirrhinums the color of liver. For all that, we thought the park a wonderful place. Anda, who was the eldest, nearly 16, wished instantly to go to the refreshment place where the boys, as well she knew, would stare their hearts out at her personal glory, for she was absolutely unforgettable. She had only to appear anywhere, and she stopped thought and conversation. She had that kind of beauty which gives some people a pang of sorrow biting deep that they could not take this perfection into their keeping. Her tawny hair was shoulder length, straight, and heavy. Her skin was palest brown with a faint rose stain in her cheeks. From this face, her violet-colored eyes beamed back on the world, humorous and starry. So there she was, lovely, exacting, and frowning now with her wishes for the afternoon. Oh, I love that. And now for something completely different. This is a fairly recent work of nonfiction by an Indigenous writer who is situated very defiantly in the colonial country called Canada. Truth-Telling, 7 Conversations About Indigenous Life in Canada by Michelle Good. Came out maybe 2 years ago, 2023. And it is just what it says. Michelle Good is a Cree writer, member of the Red Pheasant Cree Nation. This was handed down to me by my mum, and she got quite a bit out of it. The opening paragraph doesn't have a standalone vitality, but I am certainly looking forward to reading this. Quite a while back, I had among my many fabulous mystery guests, I had Brad Bigelow on, who maintains the Neglected Books page online and is involved with getting a bunch of out-of-print books back in print. And one of the ones that I think he had a daily feature tweet or something, and I found out about this book and I just ordered it. It sounded so interesting. It's called And So Did I by Malachi Whittaker. And this is her last book, published 1939, an informal journal of impressions, memories, and insights. It was published on the eve of the war. Malachi Whittaker was born in Yorkshire, 1895. Malachi does not sound to me like a woman's name, but it is. Oh, and the title, And So Did I, comes from the Ancient Mariner, which I had to look up something else that was a quote from the Ancient Mariner in the book that I'm reading to my mum last night. Here's the epigraph. And 1,000,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. Oh, that's really quite striking. I'll read the opening paragraph. Yesterday I saw an accident. A man was standing on an island in the middle of the road, and a car swept by, taking him with it on the bonnet. For perhaps half a second he stuck there. Then he was flung into the road with a heavy smacking sound. He jumped up and staggered back to the island, to the friends with whom he had been torn, out of the way of coming traffic, which he seemed to feel already rolling carelessly over his legs. People held him, and his hat fell off slowly. He lifted it up and put it tremblingly back on his head with both hands. The car had stopped inert. On the near side, a door opened, and 2 long women's legs hung out of it. They were drawn up again. There did not seem to be a policeman in this renowned London square. People drifted lightly about. The man was taken across to a bar. There had been a shower, and soon the traffic was moving along with that sticky, tearing sound it has after rain. But the car that had been the cause of the trouble still lolled there, heavy and stupid, as if to say, "This might be forgotten, it might be forgotten, I might have done no harm at all." Okay. This is a Saskatchewan book that intrigues me a lot. It's written by a settler Saskatchewanian, Bev Lundahl. I don't know anything about her, but this book sounds very intriguing. Saskatchewan Dirt, a pandemic quest for connection. And it is a work of, what would you call it? I don't want to say amateur history, but independent history, like not connected with the academic stuff, and maybe hybridized, joined together with memoir about the early connections between settlers and Indigenous people in southeast Saskatchewan. And this author found a lot of really interesting stuff and then went on a road trip in the spring of 2020, right in the pandemic, with Georgina Sir, the Métis chairperson of Intercultural Grandmothers. And that's what this book is about. And that just sounds so up my street. And it was published in 2023. Here is the epigraph from Joyce Carlson, who was connected to the United Church of Canada. I won't read the whole long description of who she is. I'll just read the quote. When I was a child in school, I was taught to, quote, share, unquote. I already knew how to share. I should have been taught the concept of private ownership instead, so I could survive in a different culture. So I think Joyce Carlson must be Indigenous, just based on context. The opening paragraphs regurgitate what I've just told you that I got from the back, so I won't read anything from it, but it sure sounds fascinating. Okay, next is a Taiwanese novel called Taiwan Travelogue by Yáng Shuāng-zǐ, translated from the Mandarin Chinese by Lin King, by a Grey Wolf Press book, 2024. This has been going around, I think it's probably been going, I don't really watch BookTube very much, so I'm assuming it's gone the rounds of BookTube, that you're not hearing about it first from me, but I sure am intrigued. So it's set in 1938. The protagonist, possibly, or one of the characters, is a young novelist who travels from Nagasaki. Her name sounds very Japanese. Travels to Taiwan from Nagasaki. And that's during the Japanese colonization of Taiwan. She's not interested in any of the colonial Japanese assholes that are in charge, she is interested in local authentic food. And then she hires a Taiwanese woman much younger than she is as her interpreter, and plot ensues. Oh, that just sounds wonderful. I didn't know any of those details or hadn't retained them. Editing Shuāng here, there is a drawback to how subtly I squint and do a quick dash over the synopsis at the back, because I didn't catch the fact that there is definitely some queer energy between these two women. So quite a few of you out there might want to know that. And now you do. I don't know anything more about the author, but I'm assuming she is Taiwanese. I'll read most of the first page. Hold on, what's going on here? I couldn't help but voice the thought out loud. For in that moment, I seemed to have been transported back into the midst of Shokokusai Tenkatsu's magic troupe. I'd crossed paths with Tenkatsu's troupe long ago, before I'd started high school. They had been on tour, and on the day they arrived in Nagasaki, my aunt Kikuko and I happened upon the opening parade. The procession comprised a majestic formation of rickshaws, rows and rows of them with no end in sight, enough to rival an army regiment. The band rode at the frontmost rickshaws, performing with remarkable gusto. After them came the women magicians, beaming and waving at the crowds in exquisite maquillage. They were followed by the male magicians in top hats. Other troupe members went on foot, encircling the rickshaws and ushering them along. They held up long poles with brightly colored flags, streaks of crimson, white, violet, and azure that were no less commanding than the band's spirited music. My chest thrummed and lifted, as though something had been strung from my navel all the way up into the sky. That, more so the premise of it that I found on the back than that opening paragraph, sounds pretty darned intriguing. And for something completely different from anything I've talked about so far in this video, this is a new biography of one of my heroes, the recently deceased Black American civil rights leader and politician, John Lewis. John Lewis, A Life by David Greenberg. Came out in 2024, I think. Yes, and it's more than 500 pages. I read an interesting but somewhat unsatisfying biography of John Lewis a couple years ago. And I want to read one that will satisfy me, because I am deeply interested in everything I can find out about this great man. I'll read the opening paragraph. The chapter title is The Boy from Troy. As a child, John Lewis stood out among his siblings for his love of reading. He was always kind of a peculiar boy, his father Eddie said in a 1969 interview. Now, you take a lot of times when the children would all be playing, he got some kind of book, and he would be messing with that book, reading or doing something with it. One of John's sisters, Ethel May, known as Mimi, echoed her father's observations. He mostly read and he loved to go to school, she said. He'd pick up anything that he got to read. Just a history book or something maybe my sister had when she was going to school. An uncle, who was a school principal, gave John volumes of Robert Louis Stevenson and Charles Dickens to read, along with biographies of famous black figures like George Washington Carver and Joe Louis. Booker T. Washington was a favorite. In later years, Washington's reputation would suffer as his philosophy of black self-improvement fell from favor among intellectuals. But Lewis remained an admirer. After the Bible, he told a reporter in 1961, my favorite book is Up from Slavery, Washington's classic autobiography. And I have to say that I order so many books, not at the drop of a hat. I have no memory of why I ordered this book, but it's a Scottish novel. Now I remember. And it has an enigmatic cover and title, The Dear Green Place and Fur Sadie by Archie Hind. So is that two books together? No, it's one novel. So what a title. The Dear Green Place and Fur Sadie. The title makes me want to read it immediately. This edition 2024, originally published 1966. And I haven't read much Scottish fiction, so that's why I got it. It's a classic of Scottish 20th century literature, and it's set in Glasgow. The protagonist, she's a young working-class would-be novelist. I wonder if I'd be lucky enough to find an audiobook version of this. Oh, the first paragraph is long. I wish I could do it in a Scottish accent, but let's hear it. In every city you find these neighborhoods. They are defined by accident, by a railway yard, a factory, a main road, a park. This particular district was reached from the town by a main road. On your left as you approached, it was a public park. On your right, back from the road, was a railway embankment. Beyond the railway embankment lay stretches of derelict land of the kind seen on the edges of big cities. Broken down furnaces and kilns were still crumbling around where the clay pits had once been worked. This derelict area was divided in part by brick walls, in part by some bits of dry-stained dike, in part by some straggly hawthorn. Further on than this, slag heaps and dumps for industrial refuse. Here in Glasgow they are called coops, stretched down to the Clyde. The main road curved around the south end of the park, then entered abruptly into the neighbourhood. If you left the tram here and continued along the main road, you passed the brownstone tenement, the ground floor of which contains the shops, the surgery, the pub. On the corner opposite the pub there is an old two-story tenement, a newspaper shop, a telephone booth. Turning to the left here, you come into a street with rows of council houses. Further down the road is the school. The streets traversing this are built up with red sandstone three-story tenements. Good houses. Beyond this street, on the other side from the town, were older tenements, few of them more than 2 stories in height. Beyond these, a golf course, then fields. Past the neighborhood where the road led on out of the city, it was bounded on one side by rows of houses, modern bungalows with raw-looking gardens, old square stone houses with dirty windows and untidy heaps of rhododendron encroaching on the shaggy lawns. On the other side of the road are sand pits dug down hundreds of feet into the earth. I don't really love long descriptions of a place like that, but it was still well done. Here is a book I think I talked my mom into buying on the sale shelf at the local bookstore, and she did, and I don't think she ever read it, and so she's passed it on to me, and I think I will read it someday. It is a Ukrainian novel called Oksana, Behave by Maria Kuznetsova. I love the title, and I think it might have been written in English. Yes, it has. It was not translated. Published in 2019. The author is, I should say, Ukrainian American. She's moved to the United States from Kyiv when she was a child. This is her debut novel, and it's about that story. A Ukrainian family emigrate to Florida. Her father's a physicist, and I don't need to know anything else about it. The epigraph is Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. You never reach any truth without making 14 mistakes, and very likely 114. Those are words to live by. Opening couple paragraphs. First chapter is from 1992 in Kyiv. After I asked what America would be like, my grandmother sighed philosophically and released a mouthful of smoke out the passenger window. America, Ukraine, it's all the same in the end, Baba said, as her brother, Boris, drove us to the station. We just need a change, that's all. Some things will be better in America, and some will be worse, she declared, taking another drag on her cigarette. But think of all the men! I was only 7, so this wasn't much of a selling point. Mama and Papa were quiet on either side of me in the back seat, offering no consolation or clarification. For the last few months they had stayed up late whispering about leaving Kyiv, and during the day they left to say goodbye to friends until it was our turn to go, when their remaining friends came over to say goodbye to us. I didn't really know why we were leaving. All I knew was that we were at the start of a long journey that would end in a place called Florida, a land of beaches and theme parks. And now we were speeding by the Dnieper River and the rolling hills and maple trees I couldn't imagine living without, even on this gray November day. I would probably check out a couple reviews of this to see if it was worth reading. That didn't entirely grab me, but next is, I think, one of the biggest books my former prof and friend, I'm going to say, David Carpenter, local Saskatchewan writer, Saskatoon writer, has ever written. The Gold. I think he might have written one that's a little bit chunkier than this, but this one is 350 pages, and it was published in 2017. It's set in the Canadian North. At least one of the main characters is searching for gold there, hence the title. 2 short epigraphs. From Samuel Johnson, to have gold is to be in fear, and to want it, to be in sorrow. Ain't that the truth? And the second one from Molière, gold makes the ugly beautiful. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs from the prologue, which is entitled Ethel's Moment. She did the upstairs first. That went pretty slick because the Englishman's office was locked, and all she had to do was the master bedroom, the 2 bathrooms, and a sitting room they hardly ever used. She didn't do the 3rd floor because there had been no guests for some time. She hit the downstairs running, and by 3 o'clock she was puffing and sweaty and dying for a cigarette. Her son was supposed to give her a hand today, but he was walking the Eggers dog and taking his sweet time about it. The only thing left to do was to put away the dishes she had washed. Some went up high on either side of the sink, and the good ones went into the dining room cupboards and Mrs. Eggers' china cabinet. She opened the pantry to put away the sugar bowl. Hanging at the back of the cupboard on a little hook was a key on a tiny brass chain, a skeleton key. She had never noticed it before, but she thought it must be the one her boy had referred to. Sometimes Rennie was her little spy. But where the hell had he gotten to this afternoon? I want to keep reading that. This is the writer Jean Rhys's most well-known work of literature, and I have never read it, and I finally found an attractive used copy of Wild Sargasso Sea, and so now that's one step closer to reading it, although it's terribly tiny print. With my new glasses, I think I'll be okay, but oh, that's really tiny. First published 1966. Everybody knows about this book. I don't need to give you one bit of explanation. Here is the first 2 paragraphs. They say when trouble comes, close ranks, and so the white people did. But we were not in their ranks. The Jamaican ladies had never approved of my mother, because she pretty like pretty self, Christophine said. She was my father's 2nd wife, far too young for him, they thought, and worse still, a Martinique girl. When I asked her why so few people came to see us, she told me that the road from Spanish Town to Colibri Estate, where we lived, was very bad, and that road repairing was now a thing of the past. My father, visitors, horses, feeling safe in bed, all belonged to the past. That's quite stunning. And this, I hope to get this book haul published before I start buddy reading this, but this is going to be probably my one big tome of 2025 that everybody, even Adam, has been raving about. The Indigenous novel from Australia, Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. And I can't wait. This is going to be a buddy read with Joe Smith and Heidi of My Reading Life, starting in about 2 weeks. I'm not going to try to explain it, I'm just going to read you the opening. The epigraph is, I am not even dust, I am a dream, by Borges. The first section or chapter is called New Gods. I won't try to read the Indigenous language epigraph, I'll just read the translation. Butterflies are flying everywhere, from a Wanye dictionary in 2012, and then, as follows, this is the opening. 1. Oracle 1. Speak. Beginning with story. Once upon a fine time for some people in the world, but not so plenteous, nor perfect for others, there lived a cultured dreamer obsessing about the era. He was no great dreamer, no greater than the rest of the juggernauts in his heartbroken, storm country people's humanity. They knew just as much as he did about surviving on a daily basis, and about how to make sacrifices of themselves in all the cataclysmic times generated by the mangy dogs who had stolen their traditional land. These people, after the generations of dealing with the land thief criminals, like many others around the world, had turned themselves not into a tangled web of despair, but into some of the best fighters of all times. They used pure guts for improving life, and said they were in it for the long run. Theirs was a sovereign worldview, the main view acceptable to their governing ancestors, a law grown through belief in its own endlessness, and through resetting the survival barometer from millennia a couple of 100 years ago, by evolving a new gauge, something like a moth's sonar, for only hearing what it wanted to hear. But, to be frank, the facet worked like a shield, for seeing what they wanted to see of the world, or to shut the whole thing out forever, and for deciding whether they wanted to speak at all. For sometimes, this world never spoke for years. Then when it did, spoke wreckage words, like a piece of heaven heavy with intent, firing on all cylinders from the sky. That's stunning and challenging. I think I'd need to read that paragraph a couple times to get everything, or to get more things out of it. I hope they're not all like that, or I'm going to have a big 2 or 3 month long headache. But it sounds fascinating. Here is a Willa Cather novel, Death Comes for the Archbishop. Again, I just found a used copy somewhere that was in beautiful condition, so I snatched it up. I can't remember if I studied this one at university. set in 1851 in New Mexico. I have finally gotten into Willa Cather after recovering from my grad school trauma. Originally published in 1927, opening paragraph of the prologue. One summer evening in the year 1848, 3 cardinals and a missionary bishop from America were dining together in the gardens of a villa in the Sabine Hills overlooking Rome. The villa was famous for the fine view from its terrace. The hidden garden in which the 4 men sat at table lay some 20 feet below the south end of this terrace, and was a mere shelf of rock, overhanging a steep declivity planted with vineyards. A flight of stone steps connected it with the promenade above. The table stood in a sanded square, among potted orange and oleander trees, shaded by spreading ilex oaks that grew out of the rocks overhead. Beyond the balustrade was the drop into the air, and far below the landscape stretched soft and undulating. There was nothing to arrest the eye until it reached Rome itself. This was my friend Nora, who lives in Dublin and is the creator of Spinster September. This was her group read last year, and I was too, as usual, overcommitted to participate, but I finally got the novel, and I'll read it maybe for Spinster September this year. Rhine Journey by Anne Schlee. And this has been reprinted in this McNally edition. It came out 2024, originally published in 1980. I didn't realize how attractive these McNally editions were. I think I'd forgotten. They're quite lovely. It's set in 1851. After the workers' revolutions, English tourists are coming back to the continent. Among the sightseers are a probably Anglican priest, his wife and daughter, and that priest's maiden sister Charlotte, who I'm assuming will be the protagonist if it's a spinster novel. Who is Anne Schlee? 1934 to 2023, born in Connecticut. Grew up in Egypt, Sudan, and Eritrea, and then went to boarding school in England, and I think spent the rest of her life there. Wow. I'll read the first full page. Chapter 1 is called The Landing Stage at Koblenz. The luggage has simply been left on the deck, said the Reverend Charles Morrison. I had thought, Charlotte, that you were with it. Charlotte, his sister for whose summer excursion, the fact suffused her at this moment, he had generously paid, said, Surely you didn't ask me. Was it necessary to ask? I assumed that when you went off by yourself onto the deck, it was to check on the luggage, knowing as you did that I was otherwise occupied. For he had been distributing tracts for the edification of their fellow passengers. She could not restrain a glance at the black velvet bag slung across his shoulder, nor repress her sensation of relief that it was empty. She said of the luggage, I'm sure it is quite safe. On the contrary, you have no occasion to be sure of any such thing. We have been warned often enough of thieving on the Rhine, and have observed the extreme negligence of the shipowners. I have impressed upon you before, Charlotte, the possibility that the captain may actually be in league with the thieves. It is our duty to be vigilant at all times over the property of others as well as our own. That was completely beguiling. I want to keep reading. And finally, it was released a few months ago, but it's a fairly new release from Blue Moose Books in West Yorkshire, the publisher of Ronan Hession, Orla Owen et al. This one is called A Dream of White Horses by Paul Scraton or Scraton. I'm not sure of the pronunciation. I think with only one T it would be Scraton, but I don't know for sure. It's quite a beautiful cover. The protagonist, Ben, travels from London to a small German island. I didn't know Germany had islands. I don't know why it wouldn't, but I've never heard of a German island, have you? To see his famous friend Pascal. He travels by train, so all along that train journey, he's listening to voice notes from Pascal, and Pascal is a man's name, that are anecdotes. Pascal is telling him by voice note about his life. That is an intriguing premise. I'll read the first 2 paragraphs of chapter 1. A city scene viewed from the center of the street. On either side, 6-story houses, all the same height and yet each with their own character. Some feature elaborate stucco work around the windows. Others have tall entranceways, high enough to accommodate a horse-drawn carriage. There are houses with balconies bolted onto the exterior walls, space for bicycles or boxes of herbs and tomatoes beside small tables and fold-out chairs. At the end of the street, the sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows. On the pavement, a person walks away, a slim silhouette. They wear a long coat that falls down to the back of their knees. No further identifying features. A hillside of beech trees, their trunks standing tall above a thick layer of leaves on the ground. It is late winter or early spring. Between the trees, black wooden crosses have been hammered into the ground. There is no obvious pattern. A cluster of 4 over to the left. A number of pairs. Some stand solitary, leaves bunched at their base. Altogether, there are 17 in view. 17 black crosses, although there is a sense that there are more, many more, just out of sight. That was vivid. I'm not wowed by a long description of the setting. I'd rather jump right into the people in it, but that was quite lovely regardless. That's my book haul. Any of these appeal to you? Thanks for watching.